So this video is going to be over the late classical period, and it started around the middle of the 4th century BCE when Macedonia actually tried to take over the Greek states. And the Greek states tried to unite. They united to fight this common enemy of Macedonia, and Macedonia was actually to the north of Greece. But the Greeks actually ended up getting defeated by King Philip II of Macedonia, and King Philip II of Macedonia was actually assassinated soon after his victory, and his son, Alexander the Great, ended up taking over, and he became king. And he had a lot of powerful armies, much like his father. He actually overthrew the Persian Empire, he gained control of Egypt, and he made it all the way to India. So Alexander the Great was a very powerful leader and was the leader of the Greeks. So in his own right, he was Greek. So sculpture, the frequent political upheaval, the devastating wars really took their toll on the Greek psyche, and they stopped focusing so much on perfection and order and mathematical ratios and canons. Canon by Polykleitos was very perfect. Buildings such as the Parthenon was, based on mathematical ratios, but those things became a thing of the past. During the late classical, disillusionment, alienation set in, and artists began focusing more on individual and more real appearances instead of the ideal and the perfect. So Praxitellis, this is the new approach that can be seen with the work from the sculptor Praxitellis. So he's considered to be one of the 3 greatest sculptors of the late classical period. So he still used the common themes from the classical, and his sculpted gods and goddesses still possessed extreme beauty, but he made his sculptures feature more human traits and attitudes. So that's something that's a little bit different about Praxitellis, is that his pieces had more humanistic traits built into them and attitudes. So this is Aphrodite of Nidos. This is a Roman copy of a marble statue, 350 to 340 BCE, and it's 6 feet 8 inches high, so it's a little over life size. He really took an unprecedented step here in representing the goddess nude. Typically, all the goddesses up to this point, all of the women up to this point in sculpture have been clothed. So this is actually kind of a big step in that she is shown nude. I kind of forgot to make this bigger, I'm sorry. Oh crap. And so, the women being shown this way in Greek art, like I said, is very, very unusual. And if women were depicted as nude, they were typically not noble women. They were probably prostitutes or courtesans or slave girls. But no one had ever really dared place a sculpture of an undressed goddess inside of a temple yet, and he did. Praxitellis did. And actually, the original place where it was displayed, it was actually rejected because of the nudity. And another city actually ended up buying it, Nidos, and it made Nidos famous, and many people sailed there just to view the statue. So that's a little side story there. So she's kind of engaging in an everyday activity. She has removed her garment. You can see she's got it in her hand here, and she's draped it over a hydria or water pitcher. So you can see that here. And she's about to step into the bath. And this was really quite shocking back in the day due to her nudity, but she's not erotic in any way. She's not sexual in any way. She even kinds of shields her pelvis with her hand, so she's kind of actually rather modest. And she's said to have dewy eyes, but this is a Roman copy and does not do the original justice, which was actually carved from marble. The original was. Okay, we're going to keep going. So here's another one by Praxitellis, or they think Praxitellis. And this is Hermes and the Infant Dionysus from the Temple of Hera, Olympia, Greece. copy of a marble statue by Praxitellis, 340 BCE, or an original work, 330 to 270 BCE, by a son or a grandson, so they're not totally sure. So most art historians actually think this is not a copy. If it is, it's a very high quality one. Some think it may have been carved by the master himself or grandson with the same name. The statues of Hermes, and the Infant Dionysus. And the Infant Dionysus is the wine god. Dionysus is the wine god. So Hermes is actually stopped to rest here in a forest on his journey to Nysa, where he will actually entrust the upbringing of the young Dionysus to the grandpa satyr, Pepilus Silenos, I have a hard time saying that, and the nymphs. So Hermes is kind of leaning on a trunk of a tree here. You can't totally see it because some parts are kind of broken off, but his body is actually forming this S curve, kind of an S shape, which is a hallmark of many Praxitellis statues. So one of his hallmarks is that S curve shape in the body. And Hermes actually once dangled a bunch of grapes as temptation to the infant, who would become the wine god. And this is a very tender moment. There's a lot of interaction between the two figures, and this is kind of an unusual thing. The carving is very high quality, and the delicacy of the facial features is also another feature that the statue has that was kind of rare up to this point. Many of the sculptures we have seen from the early and high classical were somewhat expressionless. They didn't have the humorous, smiling look that Hermes has here. This really tender moment that they're sharing, the interaction between these two figures, is pretty much something that wouldn't have happened in the earlier high classical. This one has a little bit more personality infused into it. So Praxitellis' gods, possess that ideal beauty, but they have more humanness due to their expressions, their attitudes, and their actions. Okay, we're going to move forward here. We're going to talk about Scopus a little bit, who is another artist from the late classical period. And during the late classical period, that's kind of one of the first times that individual artistic styles emerged. And you can see this between the artists. Before this, the artists didn't really develop their own styles as much. Scopus of Prows was another sculptor from the late classical, and he is thought to be one of the three greatest to emerge from the late classical period. His sculptures are a lot like Praxitellis, that they tend to show the human emotion, the humanization of the gods and heroes, but his hallmark was intense emotionalism. So none of his statues survive, but a gray stele found near the Issos River in Athens does give us a clue to the emotionalism that Scopus's work contained. Let's see here. Here it is. Grave stele of a young hunter found near the Issos River, Athens, Greece, 340 to 330 BCE. Marble, 5 feet 6 inches high, so it's fairly large. So the relief of this is very high. Parts of it are even almost in the round, if not in the round. And this piece actually depicts mourning, kind of a figure that's in mourning, and that is actually uncommon up until this point. The deceased is shown to the left, and he's a hunter. He's younger, and at his feet, a small boy, possibly a younger brother, is actually crying openly. Right here, he's got his, head in his hands on his lap, and at his feet, the dog also has this drooping, sad look of sorrow to it. So we can see some of that emotionalism in this piece. And there's also this older man, who is leaning on a walking stick, and he kind of seems to be thinking deeply, possibly about the ironic fate that has taken the life of his young son. The hunter looks at the viewer, kind of inviting sympathy and creating this emotional bridge with the viewer by making that eye contact with you. And these figures are unique to the late classical period because emotion is such a large element in it. So that's definitely a hallmark of Scopus. the sculptor's work, who is considered one of the three great late classical artists, along with Praxitellis. And we'll talk about the next sculptor that is considered to be the third greatest sculptor of the late classical period, and that's Lesippos of Skyon. So we'll talk about him. He was so good that Alexander the Great actually selected him to create his portrait. So Lesippos introduced a new canon of proportion in which the bodies were more slender and the heads were smaller than those of the high classical period. So we'll take a look at some of his pieces. And some of his pieces actually do survive. So Approximanos by Lesippos, Rome, Italy. This is a Roman copy of a bronze statue. So it was originally in bronze. 330 BCE. This is marble. It's a copy, but it is done in marble, 6 feet 9 inches high, so over life size. And this is his most famous work, Lesippos' most famous work. And it was originally bronze. It's an Approximanos and an athlete scraping oil from his body after exercise. So it's only known from the Roman copies, such as this one. And as you can see, the figure is much more slender than the late classical figures, and it also contains kind of this nervous energy that high classical statues just didn't possess. The high classical statues are very static and almost emotionless, and they don't have as much of an S-curve to their body as some of the late classical ones do. The scraping tool is about to reach the end of his arm at any moment, and the athlete will switch to the other hand and scrape his other arm, so we're kind of waiting for his movement to switch almost by looking at this. At the same time, he will shift his weight to the other leg, and the statue's right arm extends forward, causing the figure to break out of the rectangular box that defined the boundaries of earlier statues. So the fact that we can't see it from the side in this particular picture of the statue, but this outstretched arm is really making its way out of the container of his body almost. It's creating a lot more depth in the piece, I guess. So to comprehend the action, the viewer must move to the side or view the side in 3/4 view or in full profile view to really appreciate the statue. So the sculptor is almost asking you or inviting viewers to walk around it and view it from all angles. And this is kind of a new idea, to invite the viewer to walk all the way around it and view it from all sides. So in the next piece by Lesippos, we can see a wary Heracles, which is the same. Heracles is just the Greek Hercules. Hercules is the Roman form, but we call him Heracles when we're talking about Greek art. So the viewer is once again invited to walk all the way around this to view it from multiple angles, which is a hallmark of Lesippos' work. And this is a Roman copy that is really impressive because it's almost twice the size of the original bronze that Lesippos made. And it once stood in the baths of Caracalla in Rome. And we can see this really exaggerated muscular body. So even though he's strong, he is very weary. He's leaning on his club for support. Without it, it seems like he would topple over. And that's sort of a unique thing with Lesippos and other 4th century artists. They really rejected stability and balance as goals for statuary. So they're no longer so obsessed with balancing everything so perfectly. Heracles is actually holding the golden apples of the Hesperides behind his back. So viewers are really invited to walk around and view him holding those apples behind his back. And instead of expressing joy or serenity after completing the 12 tasks or the 12 labors that he was to do to become a god, Heracles is actually just looks sad and tired after his physical efforts. And this statue is a testimony to the late classical sculptors' interest in humanizing the Greek gods and the heroes. And the other two sculptors that we talked about, Praxitellis and Scopus and Lesippos, they all had different individualistic artistic styles, but they all had the theme in common of trying to bring that human element into their work. And we'll move on in the next video here. I think we're running out of time.